Awesome. Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today in today's discussion. I am Atindriyo Sanyal. I'm founder and CTO of Galileo, and we build tools to essentially auto-detect errors in your machine learning data so that you can create high-quality models with high-quality data. Just a little bit about me. Spent over 10 years in this area of ML systems and platforms, primarily at Uber and Apple, as part of Michelangelo team at Uber, and spent a lot of time thinking about data quality. So I'm very excited about today's discussion and particularly super excited to have our guest here today. And his name is Archi Mitra, and he has a wealth of experience building these ML systems primarily on unstructured data, actually, with text, computer vision, and a lot of recommendation systems. He's currently the Senior Director of Machine Learning at BuzzFeed, which is very interestingly in the hotbed of Gen AI these days. We'll talk more about that. And before that, he spent about 5 years at Wayfair doing machine learning on computer vision as well as recommendation systems. Super excited to have you, Archie, and welcome.
Oh, great to be here. That's high praise and great introduction for me.
No, absolutely. I do want to take a moment though, and just talk about your journey in machine learning and how you got into this field of ML. So, if you don't mind, just taking a couple of minutes just to walk through your journey.
Oh yeah, I think a good place to start, as usual for anybody in machine learning, is probably in the back in grad school. So back in grad school, I think I saw this great opportunity to research on ethical machine learning systems, and back when I was in grad school, ethical AI wasn't a thing, and so that was super exciting and interesting to me. So I jumped onto it, and back then I was doing neural networks in MATLAB, trying to isolate neurons to identify bias and its effect on fairness. And that really got my gears going. And then briefly after that, I realized MATLAB is a terrible tool to do neural networks at any scale, even small scale. And so I jumped into the industry, went to Wayfair, that just started dabbling in deep learning and given the wealth of the data they had. So really got on the ground floor of the deep learning evolution back in the day. This was before PyTorch or TensorFlow. So I was writing code in piano. And from there, my entire career has been applying and introducing the latest and greatest in deep learning into recommendation systems, computer vision, all sorts of kind of business problems and on how to solve them, and I've continued in that path to my current role at BuzzFeed.
No, that is so interesting, and it's very interesting now that you've kind of been in this space for so long, and now this whole field has kind of reached this inflection point where uh, unstructured ML was kind of this sleeping giant for so many years, and there's been these two inflection points. One was transformers, and now this whole thing. Uh, so Gen AI has become a very hot topic, and BuzzFeed is, of course, in a very interesting space, and you are leading this effort. Just high level, I'm curious to know like what kind of Gen AI applications are going on at BuzzFeed.
Yeah, I mean the view we took was with generative AI was we want to use and leverage the technology to do content experimentation, and kind of our primary philosophy, if you will, has been what kind of entertainment content can we create with AI or generative AI, which wasn't possible before generative AI. And
Right.
so versus like in the approach where what are the things we have been doing, what kind of content we have been creating, how can we replace how we create those content with AI, and then reduce manual labor versus what more can we do with AI and then unlock like a new content space for us. So specifically, what that had meant is we have reinvented very popular content formats like BuzzFeed quizzes that all of us grew up taking on Facebook. Now
Right.
comes with AI powered BuzzFeed quizzes where you get like an infinite results from them, um, or completely new. We call it chatbot games, where you're talking to somebody who's coaching you how to be an AI influencer, and
Yes.
that's kind of like really resonates with people on social media, because they're like, everybody feels like they can be an AI, they can be an influencer. Then I guess like in the second bracket of work we are doing has been on utility based chatbots. So a lot of retrieval augmented generation, to have a conversational layer on top of a recommendation system. And I guess those are three main buckets. The fourth one, which probably has a lot more potential, and remains kind of like unexplored even at BuzzFeed, is really using it as a co-pilot, not as just your coding co-pilot,
Mhm.
or just your email writing co-pilot, but for every discipline, including product management, product design, sales, even
Right.
CEO. We have this joke internally that we can be a CEO assistant, and that can help a CEO do a better job. So those are kind of like broad
Yeah.
buckets of generative ideas that we're exploring.
It's so interesting. These are certainly very creative as well as cutting edge applications of Gen AI. And yeah, it's interesting how so many of them apply so well to BuzzFeed's mission and BuzzFeed's use cases. And I also love the fact that you're sort of using these AI systems, the LLM systems, to augment what you already have rather than looking at them as eliminators of people and jobs.
Yeah.
A follow-up to that would be, more generally, you're obviously an expert in this, so you might have a good vantage point. What major industries do you think will get powered by these foundational LLMs in the near future?
Um, I think that's a really tough question to answer. I feel like the biggest industry it's going to influence hasn't been created yet, and that's something I'm excited to look forward to. Like, what does this new industry look like? For example, every time I look at it, every time I get like wowed by this technology, I feel like there's real potential for us to move towards a utopian world where it looks very similar to the movie Her, where
Mhm.
everybody has a personal assistant. And now, once everybody has a personal assistant, that's a new industry that just hasn't been developed yet. But traditionally speaking, I think any industry where the cost of hallucination is low, and it's significantly low to the benefit you would get from always on helpful support, is where this can become really powerful.
Yeah.
And so, I guess every single industry out there has a need to compress and understand large amounts of data quickly, reliably,
Yes.
and always on. And so every industry is I guess positioned to benefit from it. Um, I mean, it's hard to identify whether one will be the biggest one. People talk about, oh, it's probably customer service, the industry where it'll really be influential or powerful. Some folks kind of and I think it's probably video editing where it could be really powerful. Me, I'm biased. I feel like recommendation systems where it's going to be really powerful. But the fact that no discipline, no industry is spared from disruption from it kind of speaks volumes to the potential here.
No, that makes a lot of sense, and that's a very insightful answer. Thanks for that. Um, yeah, on those lines, I think you did mention that some of these industries where the cost of hallucination is low are primarily the main benefactors. I do agree. I would probably think certainly in the short and medium term till we have a more robust solution for some of these challenges like hallucinations. So on the topic of challenges, there's obviously a lot of hype and excitement around how to leverage these models more broadly. But there's clearly some complexities which have emerged where somehow these APIs which are offering LLM capabilities haven't become pervasive across many industries, and might be because of some of the challenges around hallucinations that you mentioned. But I keep thinking that ChatGPT came out in November of 2022, which
Mhm.
is around 9 months ago at this point, and GPT 3.5 has been available for over a year. frameworks like LangChain, which have enabled prototyping, have been available for a while now. I'm curious to hear from you, like, what are some of the challenges in these software frameworks, which is
Mhm.
preventing the scalable adoption of LLMs across these industries?
I wanna plus one that in a situation that I see, like, when ChatGPT came out, I'd be like, oh, next time when I wanna talk to my customer service agent about my cable connection, I probably should be talking to ChatGPT rather than having to call and wait on a line for like 30 minutes.
Right,
And just yesterday, I had to make a call, and I was still waiting on that call for 30 minutes. I'm like, wait, what happened? Like, it's been 9 months, and why hasn't these systems become pervasive in everyday life, and how is it not helping just yet?
right,
And so it definitely points to, I would say, I think it's 50-50. 50% of it is technical challenges that exist. I think 50% of it is strategy and execution
right,
that exists, and kind of both of them are interlinked, right? So let's kind of focus on the technical challenges, because the strategy and execution um, um, in itself will be very different for every industry and every company
yeah,
that they're tackling. So on
right,
the technical challenges, what I would say is it's very easy for you to integrate an API and be like, I'm going to make calls and return results. And now, but for the problem you're trying to solve, in traditional software engineering, even in traditional machine learning, you'll
right,
be able to measure the performance
right,
of the model before you put it out there, or measure the performance of the software system. Before, if it's like traditional software systems, its outputs are deterministic. So
right.
you know what you're putting out there and
Yes,
how much it's going to help your users. With machine learning system, it's probabilistic, but the probabilistic space is known,
right,
right? And so you know within what space would the outputs be, and you
right,
can use test sets to measure performance before you put something out there in
right,
front of users to help them.
right.
With LLMs, because those are models that you yourself probably have not trained, and they come pre-trained,
Yeah.
and so it's probabilistic the same as before, but the space at which it's probabilistic, it's impossible for you to know.
Hmm.
And so there's a lot of trepidation of like, how do we test it
Right,
and make sure that we're not, it doesn't have biases, and it follows company policies, and it's actually helpful to the user. I think that's a big challenge in trying to deploy these systems for your application use cases.
right,
I guess kind of the second challenge has been, you see all of these, LangChain and LangTool. I think there's a tremendous open source solutions, and there's a new model that comes out that's available on Hugging Face Spaces, and you can go try it out. The problem becomes where you need control over these applications that are beyond just a prototype. When it's a prototype, the test cases are also a prototype, and the
right.
test cases are not yet enterprise. The problem becomes when you have a test case or test set that is at an enterprise level, you
Hmm.
now need more control. You now need to know how many API calls is my LangChain agent making? What is the latency of those? Do we need all of those? How can we reduce it? And so you need a lot more control, which means you need a deep understanding of how those work. And now then you're at this situation where you have to take a call. Do you go with this open source technology to power it, because you're now having to have a deeper understanding of it, or do you build something in house that's a little bit less complex? So it's a classic, you use an open source Swiss Army knife, or do you build your own, very targeted butter knife for your narrow application?
That's a very, very well put answer. I really like that. I would also add maybe here that on top of what you just said, uh, even like modern machine learning models, which were deployed at in production at many companies, whether it's like Netflix movie recommendation or Uber's models, which are detecting pricing, etc. They were all kind of second enabler systems. They enhance the user experience. But now with language is such a primary interface.
Hmm.
for humans, and also to communicate through software. People are trying to strategize these LLMs to be like the front-facing thing. Like whatever
Mm.
application you build is less second degree now and more first degree, which increases the trepidations because of all the challenges that you mentioned. So very, very interesting. Um,
Yeah, 100%. I totally agree. I mean, the I think it's flipped to where you look at, machine learning model is giving you features, right?
right.
Now, LLMs are the product itself,
Exactly.
right? And they're not just part of a feature in a product, and it's a product in itself, which then you're losing a lot of control, which you had if it's just a feature in a product.
No, totally, totally. Actually, that leads me now to this interesting question around how leveraging these LLMs and building applications on top of them. From my readings and talking to many people, it seems that there's two paths which have kind of emerged. Either you prompt an LLM through an API and get
Mhm.
your job done that way, or you fine tune a foundational model on your data. So, as a practitioner, my question to you is how would you advise a practitioner to navigate the landscape of fine tuning a model versus prompting, given there's challenges on both fronts?
Mhm.
But when is it necessary to fine tune, or when can prompt engineering get you bang for the buck? How should one go thinking about this?
Yeah, I think before I answer your question, I feel like the prompt engineering versus fine tuning debate that's been going on as people try to like leverage this is kind of a false dichotomy where I feel like there's probably a third option or even like many options beyond just those two. Um, and I think there's nuance that kind of gets lost when we talk about fine tuning as well. So let me touch upon both of those before I kind of like give you my biased opinion of like where one should go with one versus the other. I guess like a third option could be um, um, I guess more on the prompting side, but also retrieval augmented generation, where yes, you're using a base LLM model, but you're augmenting its capability by letting it
Right.
access tools to perform tasks, right?
Right.
And that I feel is a third option that is getting overlooked, and I hope that'll become more pervasive with ChatGPT recently launching a fine-tuned model that has the capability to do function calling, and I feel like that's a good direction that people would have as a toolkit as a third option for people to consider, because the level of effort, in my opinion, would be prompt engineering is probably the lowest level of effort, um, followed by retrieval augmented generation or function calling, and then the third one would be then fine tuning. And then the taking a step back on the second kind of nuance around fine tuning, when we talk about fine tuning, there's for for you to get a model like ChatGPT, there are three stages of fine tuning that happens at the minimum, maybe even more, right? And so as a practitioner, if you're going out of your way and using a base foundation model and fine tuning, you'd have to deeply consider how many rounds of fine tuning do you need to do for your application, right? And so I think that's a critical aspect for you to consider in making that choice of fine tuning, right? And so let's take two examples. One example is you want to use an LLM to generate a summary of a product that you want to sell on your e-commerce website, right? You want to just dump all the data about that product into an LLM and let it generate a small summary of it. And so you can argue that rather than and you apply that with prompt engineering and you are realizing that you have a lot more information about a product that then you can put it into context, and so it's not working as well. Now you would want to decide that you want to do supervised fine tuning where you fine tune your model on the structured data and some labeled data that you have. Now in that kind of a use case, a single fine tuning step can get you far because you're only looking to get one response out of the model. Now if you take a step beyond that and you say, oh, I want to have an application where um, a user can chat with my chatbot to get product recommendations.
Right.
Now that supervised fine tuning doesn't have any chat capabilities. So now you have to do, what OpenAI or, all these chat models do with this reinforcement learning from human feedback. And you have to do reward modeling and all of those other stages of fine tuning. And so really understanding what your application needs to be
Right.
will help you decide on that. So to summarize, I would say that like broadly, there's four dimensions you want to consider. One is ease of use, right? How easy is it for you to build any of these three things? The second is latency is a big consideration. How much latency are you willing to spend? If it's like an offline thing that is not user facing, you can probably have more latency. You can think about fine tuning and hosting it yourself. Third is obviously the cost. You would want to do a cost analysis because these models can be either very expensive to run yourself or the API cost can really stack up. And the last one is, do you have the bandwidth to be iterative, right? Can you
Right.
just launch with the easiest thing first and then move on to the next, and then move on to the next one?
Yes.
And that probably is my suggestion. Start with prompt engineering. See how far can you get. Identify the failure states. Identify where it's breaking down. What
Right.
percentage of cases is it breaking down? And then move on to retrieval augmented generation. Then move on to supervised fine tuning, and then move on to something else.
That's a great answer, and I think I agree with almost all of it. In general, I think we've seen, right, whenever there's been great tools and frameworks which have launched, there's never a cookie cutter solution to anything. And the
Mhm.
more complex the systems, the more you need to squint harder and uh, just try to leverage the tools in your tool set to your advantage, because there's no one solution to anything. Well, that's awesome. I do want to talk about a very important topic, which is, I think, on everyone's minds and everyone's talking about it, which is hallucinations, and particularly hallucinations in these large language models. Essentially, people talk about these factual mistakes which these models make, and part of the hesitation in large scale adoption has been, yeah, people not knowing what these models will output, and can have catastrophic consequences on more critical industries like finance or
Mhm.
healthcare. It's a big research topic at Galileo as well, where we are creating a metric that auto detects hallucinations. So I'm very interested in knowing, from your standpoint, what should be the strategy, and are you aware of any techniques that can sort of be employed to keep these hallucinations mitigated and under control?
I think the first step in the entire world of hallucination is, if you have a tool that can tell you, hey, this is a hallucination and this is not, that'll go a long way in those trepidatious that we were talking about earlier
Right.
in our conversations. And so, like, if you guys at Galileo are researching and can come up with a tool that can tell you, oh, this is a hallucination and this is not, then you can take actions on that automatically. The
Right.
biggest challenge in hallucinations right now is A, defining what an hallucination is. B, is that a desired hallucination or is it an undesired hallucination? There are content areas, or there are applications where you want hallucinations, right? You want it to be creative. You don't want it to stick to the script.
Hmm.
The third in the hallucination space, it is probably identifying what is a hallucination and what is not. The
That's
only solution to identifying hallucinations right now, or like, categorizing outputs into hallucination versus not hallucination, is doing it manually, right? And a step further from that is to use a small training set of hallucinations and non-hallucinations from a particular model, from a particular prompt, while keeping those constant, and then training a separate machine learning model to then detect what's a hallucination, what is not a hallucination. And that can help you identify hallucinations and not um,
right.
factual answers at large scale, and then give you the ability to devise techniques on handling hallucinations. Now, techniques on handling hallucinations, I mean, that I look at it broadly in like three stages of your LLM use case or LLM use. The first is when you're training your LLM, you can have give a higher bias to factual information and lower bias to debated information, and hope to then have the LLM pick up on the fact that this is a correct answer to this question and this is an incorrect answer to this question. The second would be after the model has been trained, when you're prompting the model, there's some techniques of um, chain of thought prompting with self-consistency is another way where you ask the LLM to generate the response, the same or the same answer or same response multiple times, just by sampling them differently, and then you do a majority vote, and
I
that
see.
way you can predict that anything that has a majority vote is probably correct information and not a hallucination. And then the third one would be beyond after you have finished your in the prompting space, you can then have a separate model that judges or separate LLM that judges the output of the first LLM to decide if it's a hallucination or not. And if it decides that the probability of hallucination is higher, it kind of puts in a disclaimer that this information may not be accurate. Right. So I look at that as like three different ways you can tackle it. The third one's more preventive. Sorry, more after the fact that when once it has happened, how can you still kind of like salvage it?
Right.
But the other two can help you with hallucinations. Sorry, the other one, obviously in the property space, is retrieval augmented generation. It's actually giving the model the right information when it needs
Right.
it.
Right.
So that's another way to reduce hallucinations.
No, that's really great. What you're suggesting here is certainly I love the fact that it's sort of a mix of existing techniques that are known, and you're just employing them into these modern sort of LLM, the LLM lamp stack, if you will. Uh, Actually, related to evaluating, high quality prompts and just the outputs of these LLMs. There's generative modeling has existed for a while, and there's
Mhm.
scores like the Blue score, the Rouge score, which have typically been adopted prior to this whole revolution. But there's clear limitations because um, a lot of these metrics are very like old school skipgram based, like token matching based techniques, which used to work back in the day. Uh, but what do you think is sort of the ideal replacement for some of these scores? And this might be a reiteration of a lot of the things that you've spoken about, but maybe for our users, if you could just construct this ideal evaluation framework for LLMs, that'll be awesome.
Oh wow. I think that's an open research question, right? Like, how do you evaluate an LLM? So my view has been you should evaluate the LLM based on your application. What are your desired success metric, and measure your model on that rather than trying to measure its ability to generate text that 100% aligns with your small test set. I think that's a fallacy that you'd get into and you'd really struggle to come out of it. And so my ideal evaluation framework always has been you have a business or product KPI that you are trying to move in one direction or the other. You kind of break that down into, if you can, into a machine learning metric and try to see how LLM is performing against that, right? And so I wouldn't necessarily discard blue or rouge scores right off the gate. So for example, if you're using an LLM for translation, for example, and so in translation use cases, blue has shown again and again that it's a really strong metric that I think rouge also aligns really well with how humans evaluate quality. So in those kind of use cases, I think those still have a place. But in use cases where you are essentially building a chatbot,
Right.
and so in a chat conversation, um, evaluation framework is really hard to build because it really depends on what the user says right after, and so you just do not have that diversity in your test set to be able to come up with a metric that is reliable in a traditional machine learning sense. And
Right.
so for those kind of conversations or those kind of applications, I don't have a great answer. What's a good evaluation mechanism right now? The way I have viewed it is you are serving, if you have a chatbot, you're serving a utility for the user, right? And so that utility should probably be tied to a metric. And so your measurement of your evaluation of your performance of your use case and your LLM should be on that metric.
Right.
And then you can start working towards how can we move this metric by doing what things can we move this metric, right? And so for an example, if you're building a chatbot that recommends products in an e-commerce setting and you want to see how many product clicks the users are getting, how often did the model recommend products,
Right.
and how often did the user click on it? Was it two more? Was it less? And then now from there you can take feedback and tune the model to be more aggressive with the recommendations or be less aggressive with the recommendations.
I don't know, makes sense. This is so fascinating. I can go on and on. There's so many questions I have, but in the interest of time, I would love to ask you one last question. This is very high level. What excites you most about this whole LLM revolution and where it's headed?
What excites me most, well, I, I think what excites me most is or okay, I'll answer this question like what I would like to see in the very near future is having a secure, self-owned LLM software as well as hardware that can act as a personal assistant for everything in my life, right? And so it could be like, you're a company who send me a device that sits in my home that I hook up to my router. That's
Nice.
where my LLM runs. That's where my data is stored. And that personal assistant goes with me everywhere and has access to everything that I have access to, right? And so
Yes.
you can then things, get a lot of things done just by talking to it. Because it's how humans do get stuff done, right? They talk to either themselves or talk to others to get things done. And that's where I feel like what I want to see AI become is this personal assistant that is secure, that is fair, and that I have full control over
Mhm.
and helps me do everything that I want to do. Right? That's it, I guess, kind of like
That's so fascinating.
utopian dream.
Maybe I'll watch the movie Her again today just to get
Yeah,
an idea.
yeah, for sure, for sure. Yeah, I guess that's. I would ask you the same question. What are you most excited about, and what's your biggest dream of this Gen AI revolution?
Yeah, I mean, I might, my answer might be less awesome than yours, but what excites me most is the fact that this is a revolution, not in some model architecture which is not visible, but it's finally there's a software system that can that can uh, that has changed the language interface, and language is one of the primary mechanisms through which humans communicate and has been one of the key reasons why we've evolved to where we are today. So I'm very excited to see where this goes just generally. And I have strong conviction that because it's in the realm of language and communication, it's kind
Hmm.
of like, why was the iPhone such a big revolution? I feel like one of the reasons was because it was tapping the realm of communication,
Hmm.
which which we use on a day to day. And this is another sort of very similar thing. So I'm very excited to see where it goes. And I mean, the sky is the limit on the applications.
Yeah, yeah, I think the parallel between iPhone and an LLM is really interesting to pursue and think to. I think that's a thought experiment we can leave
Yeah,
our audience with.
totally. Thank you so much, Archie. It was so much fun talking to you, and I'm very excited to see where your career goes from here.
Oh, likewise, I'm very excited to see what Galileo comes up with in the LLM space. I'm looking forward to. Can't wait to get my hands on those tools and really solve the problem of why isn't LLMs pervasive as they should be now that it's been 9 months since they came out?
Totally. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Atid.
Cool.